After selling my house for $10 million, I claimed I was homeless. Everyone turned away except one. He signed the final paper without ceremony. No smile, no picture, no handshake that lasted longer than it had to. The room was quiet except for the scratch of pens and the low hum of the air conditioner. When it was done, the house he had lived in for most of his adult life no longer belonged to him. $10 million moved from one account to another with a few clicks, clean and silent, like it meant nothing at all. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. He stepped outside into the parking lot and stood still for a moment. The sun was bright, the day ordinary. Cars passed. People talked on phones. No one knew that something big had just happened. That felt right to him. He had never liked loud moments. The biggest choices of his life had always been made quietly, when no one was watching. The house had been sold because it was time. That was the simple answer. It was too big now, too full of rooms that held memories instead of people. He had walked its halls for years, past framed photos and furniture that never moved, and felt like a guest in his own life. Money was not the problem. It never had been. Loneliness was. He had done well for himself. He worked hard, saved smart, took risks when others were afraid. Over time, success followed him like a shadow. Businesses grew. Investments paid off. His name carried weight in rooms where deals were made. But somewhere along the way, the people who mattered most to him had begun to look at him differently. At first it was small things. A call that only came when someone needed advice. A visit that ended with a casual mention of bills or problems. Jokes about how lucky he was, how easy life must be for him. He laughed along, even helped when he could, because that was what family did. Or at least, what he believed family should do. But years passed, and the pattern became hard to ignore. Birthdays were forgotten unless he planned them himself. Holidays felt like obligations, not celebrations. Conversations drifted toward money even when he tried to steer them away. He began to feel less like a brother, an uncle, a son, and more like a resource. The thought bothered him late at night, when the house was silent. He would sit at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at the same spot on the wall, asking himself questions he never said out loud. If he stopped helping, would they still call? If the money was gone, would he still matter? Selling the house did not answer those questions, but it opened the door to something else. A chance to test a truth he was afraid to face. He did not tell anyone about the sale. Not his siblings, not his extended family, not even the one relative he still spoke to regularly. He moved his things slowly, a little at a time, into a small apartment on the other side of the city. It was clean, modest, and quiet. No gate, no driveway, no space for guests to stay too long. On the first night there, he sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the sounds of the building. Footsteps in the hallway. A door closing somewhere above him. A distant siren. It felt strange, but also light, like he had set something heavy down. The money from the sale stayed exactly where it was. He did not touch it. He did not change his habits or his clothes. He drove the same car. Ate the same food. To the outside world, nothing about him looked different. That was important. This was not about pretending to be someone else. It was about removing one thing and seeing what remained. A week later, he made the first quiet move. When a family group chat lit up with complaints about rising costs and tight months, he did not respond. He read the messages, felt the familiar pull to fix things, and resisted it. His phone stayed face down on the table. No one checked in on him that day. Or the next. Another week passed. A relative called, sounding cheerful at first, then quickly getting to the real reason for the call. A loan. Not a big one, just temporary. He listened, calm and polite, and then said something he had never said before. "I can't help right now." There was a pause on the line. A small laugh, like the words had been a joke. "You're serious?" "Yes," he said. "I am." The conversation ended sooner than usual. No follow-up question. No concern. Just surprise, and then distance. That night, he walked through his new neighborhood. Small shops, dim lights, people sitting alone on benches. He realized no one here knew who he was or what he had. And for the first time in a long while, that felt peaceful. The idea formed slowly, not as a plan but as a feeling that grew stronger each day. He would let people believe the money was gone. Not in a dramatic way. No big announcement. Just enough truth removed that the reactions would be honest. When someone finally asked about the house, he shrugged and said he had sold it. Downsized. Simplified. When they asked why, he said it was expensive to maintain. When they asked where the money went, he gave a vague answer about debts, taxes, and timing. He did not lie loudly. He let assumptions do the work. The reactions were telling. Some people went quiet. Some changed the subject. A few offered brief words of sympathy that felt rehearsed. No one asked how he was feeling. No one asked if he was okay. Days turned into weeks. Invitations stopped coming. Calls became rare. Messages went unanswered unless they were practical or short. He watched it happen with a strange mix of hurt and clarity. This was what remained when the idea of money faded from the room. He was not angry. That surprised him the most. He felt sad, yes, and disappointed. But he also felt something else. Freedom. One afternoon, he sat in a small cafe near his apartment, sipping cheap coffee and watching rain streak the window. A man at the next table struggled with a broken umbrella, laughing at himself as water dripped onto the floor. They exchanged a smile. Nothing more. It was a simple moment, but it felt real in a way many family gatherings no longer did. He began to understand that he had been holding on to an image for too long. The reliable one. The successful one. The one who fixed things. Letting that image go felt like losing a role he had played for years, but it also felt like finally stepping off a stage. At night, doubt still crept in. He wondered if he was being unfair. If he had created the situation by always saying yes. If pulling back now made him the problem. But every time his phone stayed silent, every time someone failed to ask how he was doing, the doubt eased. This was not revenge. It was not a trap. It was a quiet test of something fragile and important. And the results were becoming clear. He kept a small notebook on the kitchen counter and wrote down thoughts when they came. Short lines. Honest ones. Things he had ignored for years. I miss being seen. I miss conversations without an agenda. I want to matter even when I have nothing to give. The pages filled slowly. With each word, he felt more grounded, more certain that this decision, though painful, was necessary. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in soft orange, his phone rang. A number he recognized but had not seen in weeks. He answered, not with hope, but with curiosity. The voice on the other end sounded rushed. Concerned, but not about him. About a situation. A problem. Money was mentioned again, carefully this time, like stepping around broken glass. He listened. Then he repeated the same calm sentence. I can't help. There was silence. Then a sigh. Then the call ended. He set the phone down and stared out the window. The city lights flickered on one by one. Somewhere, people were gathering, talking, sharing meals. He was alone, but he no longer felt invisible. This was only the beginning. He knew that. Harder moments would come. Truths would surface. Choices would have consequences. But for the first time in years, he felt honest with himself. He had made a quiet decision. Not to disappear, but to stop performing. Not to punish, but to understand. To find out once and for all, who would still stand beside him if the money truly was gone. And whatever the answer turned out to be, he was finally ready to face it. He did not rush into it. 4 days after the last call ended, he sat with the idea, turning it over in his mind like a stone in his hand. He wanted to be sure. Not because he feared being found out, but because once spoken, the words could not be taken back. Saying the money was gone was one thing. Saying he had fallen completely was another. In the end, he realized that half-truths would only lead to half-answers. If he truly wanted to know where he stood, the story had to feel real. It had to be uncomfortable. It had to remove every excuse. He started with the people he thought were closest. Not all at once. One by one. Each call felt heavier than the last. The first conversation was careful and controlled. He explained that a series of bad decisions had caught up with him. Investments that went wrong. Legal costs that spiraled faster than expected. He spoke slowly, choosing words that sounded honest without being dramatic. He said the house was gone. Sold under pressure. He said the money was tied up, frozen, spoken for. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Then questions. Quick ones. How did this happen? Why didn't you say something sooner? Are you sure it's that bad? When he said yes, that it really was that bad, the tone shifted. Sympathy thinned. Concern turned practical. So what are you going to do? That was when he added the final piece. The one that made his throat tighten. I don't have a place right now, he said. I'm staying wherever I can. Silence followed. Not shocked silence. Calculating silence. Well, the voice finally said. That's unfortunate. Unfortunate. Not frightening. Not heartbreaking. Just inconvenient. They talked a little longer, but the warmth never returned. Advice was offered, but no help. Suggestions about shelters, short-term rentals, government programs. The call ended with a promise to check in later. That promise was never kept. He sat still for a long time after, phone resting in his palm, screen dark. The truth had not even fully landed yet, and already it hurt more than he expected. The second call went worse. This time, he barely finished explaining before the response came, sharp and uneasy. How could you let this happen? He answered calmly. Mistakes. Trusting the wrong people. Timing. The same things that happened to many, just at a larger scale. There was a sigh. A long one. You always seemed so careful. I was, he said. Until I wasn't. When he mentioned being without a home, the reaction was immediate, but not in the way he hoped. You can't stay with us, came the reply, quick and firm, before he had even asked. Things are already tight. You understand. He said he did understand. And he meant it. What he did not understand was how easy it was for the door to close. The call ended shortly after. No goodbye. Just a polite excuse about being busy. By the third conversation, he felt numb. The words came easier, like lines he had practiced. Financial collapse. Legal trouble. Temporary homelessness. Each time, the response followed a similar pattern. Surprise. Discomfort. Distance. Some people changed the subject almost immediately. Others offered surface-level sympathy, the kind that sounds kind but carries no weight. A few became awkward, their voices stiff, like they were speaking to a stranger. No one said, "Are you safe?" No one said, "Come stay with me." One person laughed nervously, as if the situation were a strange joke. Well, I guess this shows that money really can disappear, they said. He forced a small chuckle in return, even though his chest felt tight. The call ended moments later. As the day went on, he noticed something else. Word traveled fast. People he had not spoken to in months began sending short messages. Heard you're having a rough time. Hope things work out. Let me know if you need advice. Advice. Always advice. Never support. He did not reply to most of them. He sat at the small table in his apartment, staring at the wall, replaying each conversation in his head. He searched for signs he might have missed. A pause that meant concern. A question left unasked. Anything that suggested he mattered beyond his past usefulness. There was very little to find. Late that evening, one call came that stood out. The voice was quieter, less rushed. They listened without interrupting as he told the same story again. When he finished, there was a long pause. "That's hard," the voice said. "I'm sorry." His shoulders relaxed without him realizing they had been tense. Finally, something that sounded real. Then came the follow-up. "I wish I could help, but we've got our own problems right now." Of course. The call ended kindly, but empty all the same. When night fell, the apartment felt smaller than usual. He turned off the lights and sat in the dark, letting the silence settle. The test was no longer theoretical. It was personal now. And it was painful. He thought about all the times he had rearranged his life for others. The trips cancelled. The weekends spent fixing problems that were never his. The checks written without hesitation. He had told himself it was love. That family meant showing up no matter what. Now he wondered if it had only ever meant showing up with something to offer. The next morning, his phone was quiet. No messages asking how he slept. No follow-ups. Life had moved on quickly without him. He went for a walk to clear his head. The city felt indifferent, but honest. People hurried past, each wrapped in their own struggles. No one expected anything from him here. No one knew his past or his fall. He was just another face in the crowd. At a small park, he sat on a bench and watched a group of strangers share food and laughter. They had nothing obvious in common, yet they seemed more connected than he felt to his own blood. A thought settled in slowly, heavy but clear. Losing money was one thing. Losing the illusion of connection was something else entirely. Over the next few days, the pattern held. Some people avoided him completely. Others checked in once, then disappeared. A few offered shallow encouragement, the kind that ends with, "Let me know how it goes," without any intention of staying involved. He did not chase them. He did not explain himself further. The silence was an answer all on its own. At night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the building. He wondered how long it would take before people forgot about him entirely. How quickly someone could become irrelevant once their value was removed. There were moments of guilt too. He questioned whether this test was cruel. Whether lying, even for clarity, crossed a line. But then he remembered the ease with which people had stepped back. The speed with which doors had closed. The lie had not created the distance. It had revealed it. One afternoon, he received a message that made him pause. It was short, direct. "So what's your plan now?" No concern. No warmth. Just curiosity, like watching a story unfold from a safe distance. He typed a response, then deleted it. Some truths did not need to be explained. By the end of the week, he felt changed. Not broken, but sharpened. The world looked clearer now, stripped of polite noise and false closeness. It hurt, yes, but it also grounded him. He understood something important. When people say family is everything, they often mean when things are easy. When resources are flowing. When being close costs nothing. He folded that understanding into himself, quietly, the same way he had made the decision to sell the house. The same way he had stepped away from the role he had played for so long. This lie, uncomfortable and heavy, had changed everything. It had shown him not who he could rely on, but who he could stop relying on. And though the truth of his wealth still sat untouched in an account no one knew about, he felt poorer in one way and richer in another. The test was working. And the answers, painful as they were finally honest. At first, he told himself this phase would pass. That people just needed time to process the news. Shock made people awkward, he reasoned. Distance could still turn into care if given space. He wanted to believe that. But days went by, then more days, and the pattern did not soften. It hardened. The messages he did receive felt different now. Shorter. Careful. Almost rehearsed. The warmth that once existed, even if it had been mixed with expectation, was gone. One relative sent a long voice note explaining why they couldn't help. It was detailed, almost apologetic, listing bills, responsibilities, stress. The explanation went on for minutes. When it ended, there was a pause, then a quick addition. "You'll figure it out. You always do." It was meant to sound encouraging. Instead, it landed like a dismissal. Another conversation carried a sharper edge. Less sympathy, more judgment. "You took risks," they said. "That's what happens when things don't work out." He agreed quietly. He did not argue. He knew risks carried consequences. What surprised him was how quickly understanding turned into blame. "So what do you expect people to do?" the voice continued. "Everyone has problems." The question hung in the air. He had never expected rescue. Not really. But he had expected something human. A pause. A question about his safety. A sign that his struggle mattered. Instead, he felt like a lesson being discussed, not a person being spoken to. Some relatives offered advice in abundance. Links to articles. Suggestions about budgeting, downsizing further, finding temporary work. One even suggested he sell things he no longer had. He thanked them all. He always thanked them. It was easier than explaining that advice without care only added weight. Then there were the excuses. They came wrapped in polite language and soft tones. "We'd love to help, but the timing isn't right. Our place is too small. Things are complicated right now." Each excuse sounded reasonable on its own. Together, they painted a clear picture. There was no space for him. Not physically. Not emotionally. A few people stopped responding entirely. Messages read but unanswered. Calls that went to voicemail again and again. He could see the moment he was no longer a priority. That silence hurt more than any harsh word. Silence required no explanation. It simply erased him. He noticed how conversations ended faster now. Where calls once lasted half an hour, they now wrapped up in 5 minutes. Where there used to be laughter, there was urgency. "I have to go," became the most common phrase he heard. At night, he replayed these moments in his mind. Not obsessively, but carefully, like someone reviewing footage to understand what went wrong. He searched for the exact moment when concern stopped being natural and started being forced. He began to see it clearly. Their care had always been tied to stability, to the idea that he was fine, useful, safe to lean on. Without that image, he made people uncomfortable. One evening, he decided to test something small. He sent a simple message to 3 relatives he once felt closest to. "I'm having a hard day," he wrote. "Could really use someone to talk to." The first reply came hours later. "Sorry, just saw this. Hope you're okay." Nothing more. The second never replied at all. The third responded the next morning. "Hang in there." 2 words. No question. No follow-up. He stared at the screen for a long time. Not angry. Just tired. He realized something then that stayed with him. People often believe support means words. But real support costs something. Time. Attention. Space. Comfort. And no one was willing to pay that cost. He stopped initiating contact after that. Not out of spite but clarity. He wanted to see who would reach out without prompting. Very few did. Those who did kept the conversation light. They avoided asking questions that might require emotional effort. They spoke about the weather, about work, about anything except him. He played along. He learned how to speak without revealing much. How to sound fine even when he wasn't. It was a skill he had unknowingly perfected over years. During the day, he kept busy. Long walks. Quiet meals. Simple routines. He learned the rhythm of his new life. It was smaller, but honest. Sometimes, he passed by places where he used to meet family. Restaurants where he paid every bill. Homes where he had been welcomed warmly once. He noticed how those doors now felt further away, even if they stood in the same place. One afternoon, he ran into a distant relative by chance. The encounter was awkward, brief. "Oh, I heard about your situation," they said, lowering their voice. "That's rough." He nodded. "Well," they added, stepping back slightly, "I'm sure things will turn around." Then they left. Quickly. He stood there alone, feeling like a story people whispered about, not a person they stood beside. The realization settled slowly but firmly. Their concern was conditional. It existed as long as he did not need too much. As long as he did not disrupt their comfort. He remembered all the times he had made space for others, even when it was inconvenient. All the times he had listened, supported, stayed late, rearranged plans. He had never once thought to measure the cost. Now he saw the imbalance clearly. Late one night, he wrote again in his notebook. Care that disappears isn't care. Concern without action is distance in disguise. Being alone is different from being abandoned. Writing those words did not fix the ache, but it gave it shape. And once shaped, it felt easier to carry. He stopped checking his phone as often. Stopped waiting for replies that never came. He accepted the quiet not as punishment, but as information. This distance, painful as it was, gave him something valuable. Truth. He was no longer confused about where he stood. No longer guessing who cared and who merely watched. Family had turned distant, not suddenly, but honestly. The closeness he thought existed had been fragile all along. And as the days passed, he felt a shift inside himself. A slow release of expectation. A quiet strength forming where disappointment once sat. If this was what remained when everything else was stripped away, then at least he finally knew. And knowing, he realized, was the first step toward choosing better connections. Ones that did not vanish the moment he had nothing left to offer. Turning to friends felt different. Family carried history and obligation, but friends were supposed to be chosen. Built on shared time, trust, and moments that had nothing to do with money. If anyone would show up now, he believed it would be them. He started carefully, reaching out to people he had known for years. People who had sat across from him at late dinners, who had called him in moments of panic, who had leaned on him when life felt heavy. He reminded himself not to expect miracles. Just honesty. Just presence. The first response came quickly. "Man, I'm really sorry you're going through this." It sounded genuine. He felt a small lift in his chest. Then the message continued. "You're smart. You'll bounce back." That was it. No question. No offer to meet. No suggestion beyond confidence in a future that felt very far away. Another friend asked for details. He shared them, briefly. The collapse. The legal trouble. The lack of a stable place to stay. There was a pause, then a long reply full of advice. Suggestions about networking, side work, staying positive. The tone was upbeat, almost motivational. At the end, a line stood alone. "Let me know how it goes." He stared at the screen, feeling something sink. Advice again. Always advice. As if words could replace action. A few friends reacted with shock. They sent multiple messages at once, expressing disbelief. They said things like, "I never would have guessed," and "This must be rough." For a moment, it felt like connection. Then the conversation slowed. Replies came hours later. Then a day later. Then not at all. He noticed how quickly the energy faded once it became clear he wasn't just venting. Once it was obvious this wasn't a short story with a neat ending. One friend suggested meeting for coffee. Hope sparked. He agreed immediately. They picked a place halfway between them. When the day came, the friend arrived late, checked their phone often, and steered the conversation away from anything heavy. They talked about work, sports, mutual acquaintances. When he tried to share how hard the past weeks had been, The friend nodded, but glanced at the time. That's tough, they said. Life can flip fast. They left early, citing another obligation. He sat alone at the table long after, coffee untouched, listening to the low noise of the cafe. He felt lonelier there than he had in his apartment. There were friends he had helped before. Paid a bill. Covered rent. Offered a place to stay for a night or two. Never keeping score. Never mentioning it again. Reaching out to them felt awkward, but necessary. The responses were polite, but guarded. I wish I could do more. Things are complicated right now. I hope you understand. He did understand. He just didn't forget. One message stood out because of how carefully it was written. You know I care about you. But I don't think I'm in a position to get involved. Get involved. As if support were a risk, not a relationship. Days passed. The gaps between messages grew wider. Conversations that once flowed easily now required effort. He felt like he was interrupting lives instead of being part of them. He stopped sharing details. When asked how he was doing, he answered simply, managing. Getting by. People seemed relieved by that. As if his ability to cope removed any responsibility to care. One evening, he scrolled through old message threads. Laughing jokes. Late-night talks. Plans made and memories shared. It was strange to see how alive those conversations once were, compared to the quiet now. He wondered if he had misread those friendships all along. Or if circumstances had simply revealed their limits. A friend he trusted called one night. The voice sounded sincere. I've been thinking about you, they said. He waited. I don't really know what to say, the friend continued. I've never been good at this kind of thing. That's okay, he replied. There was a pause. Well, the friend said, clearing their throat, just wanted you to know I'm rooting for you. The call ended soon after. Rooting. From a distance. He placed the phone face down and leaned back against the couch. The test was no longer just revealing others. It was revealing him too. His expectations. His needs. His quiet hope that someone, anyone, would step closer instead of away. The silence between messages began to feel heavier than rejection would have. Silence gave him time to imagine what people were thinking. Time to wonder if he had become a burden simply by existing in a hard season. He started noticing how often people avoided asking follow-up questions. How quickly they changed topics when the conversation drifted toward struggle. Discomfort was easier to manage than empathy. One friend sent a long message about staying positive, about mindset, about not letting setbacks define him. It read like something copied from a book. He thanked them, then put the phone down and stared at the wall. The truth settled in slowly. Friendship, like family, often had boundaries people never talked about. Invisible lines drawn around comfort, time, and inconvenience. When those lines were crossed, closeness pulled back. He had always believed friendship meant standing nearby when life got messy. Now he saw that for many, it meant cheering from a safe distance. The hurt surprised him. He had prepared himself for disappointment from family. Friends felt different. More personal. Late one night, unable to sleep, he went for a walk. The streets were quiet. Lights glowed softly behind windows. Somewhere inside those homes, people laughed, argued, rested. Life went on. He realized he had been carrying a quiet fear all along. That without stability, without usefulness, he might fade out of people's lives entirely. That fear was no longer abstract. A message came in the next day from a friend he hadn't heard from in weeks. Hey, just checking in. Hope things are improving. Improving. Always moving forward. Never allowed to sit still in pain. He typed a reply, then erased it. Finally, he sent a short response. Still the same. There was no reply after that. He stopped reaching out altogether. The quiet that followed was deep, but clean. It hurt, but it was honest. No mixed signals. No waiting. He began to see that the test was asking more of him than he expected. It wasn't just about seeing who would help. It was about facing the reality that many connections had been lighter than he believed. That realization stung. Not because people were cruel, but because they were comfortable staying distant. He wrote in his notebook again. Some people care as long as it costs nothing. Support that stays verbal disappears fast. It hurts to see limits clearly. The words came slowly, but they steadied him. He understood now that pain was part of clarity. That disappointment was not the enemy. Confusion was. Friends had revealed their limits. Not loudly. Not unkindly. But unmistakably. And though the test was hurting more than he ever expected, he knew something important had changed inside him. He was no longer chasing reassurance. He was learning who could walk with him through silence, and who could only watch from afar. By the time this moment came, he had stopped expecting anything from anyone. Expectation had become too heavy to carry. Letting it go felt safer, even if it meant accepting a quieter, lonelier world. His days had settled into a simple rhythm. Wake up. Eat something small. Walk. Sit. Think. Nights were the hardest. Silence stretched longer after dark, and thoughts had more room to wander. He no longer checked his phone often. Most days, it stayed untouched on the table. That was when the message came. It wasn't from someone he spoke to often. Not a close friend. Not a family member. Someone he knew, but never leaned on. Someone who had always existed at the edges of his life. The message was short. Hey. I heard you've been having a rough time. He read it once, then set the phone down. He had learned not to read into things. A few minutes later, another message followed. You don't have to explain if you don't want to. That made him pause. He picked the phone back up. His fingers hovered over the screen before he finally replied. Yeah. Things fell apart. The response came quickly. I'm sorry. That's hard. No advice. No questions. Just that. They talked a little. Nothing detailed. No long story. He mentioned being between places. He did not use the word homeless this time. He didn't need to. There was a pause. Longer than usual. Then the message appeared. Come stay with me. We'll figure it out. He stared at the words. Read them again. Then again. There was no condition attached. No timeline. No suggestion of what he should do next. Just an open door. His chest tightened in a way he hadn't felt in weeks. Not pain this time. Something warmer. Unfamiliar. You don't have to, he typed back. I don't want to be a burden. The reply came almost immediately. You're not. That was it. He sat very still, phone in his hands, as if moving might break the moment. After everything he had seen, after all the careful distance and quiet exits, this simple offer felt unreal. This person was not wealthy. They did not have extra space or spare money. He knew that. Their life was modest, busy, ordinary, which made the offer mean more, not less. He accepted. The next day, he packed what little he had. One bag. A few clothes. The notebook. He locked his apartment door behind him and felt a strange mix of relief and fear. When he arrived, the place was small. Clean, but lived in. Shoes by the door. A few photos on the wall. The smell of food in the air. They greeted him without awkwardness. No long hug. No heavy words. Just a simple welcome. Make yourself comfortable, they said. You can take the couch. He nodded, unsure what to say. Later, they ate together. Nothing fancy. Simple food. Easy conversation. They talked about everyday things. Work. News. Small annoyances. No one brought up his situation unless he did. At one point, he realized something surprising. He felt safe. Not fixed. Not rescued. Just safe. That night, lying on the couch, he stared at the ceiling and listened to the quiet sounds of another person moving through their home. It felt different from being alone. Less empty. No one had asked when he would leave. No one had asked how long this would last. The next morning, they made coffee and handed him a cup without comment. The gesture was small, but it landed deeply. Over the following days, they fell into an easy routine. He helped where he could. Dishes. Small repairs. Cooking when he felt up to it. Nothing was expected. Nothing was counted. Sometimes they talked about his situation. Sometimes they didn't. When they did, the tone was steady. "We'll take it one step at a time," they said once. No rush. No rush. He had not heard those words in years. He noticed how different this felt from everything else. There was no advice overload. No silent judgment. No discomfort in the air. Just presence. One evening, sitting quietly after dinner, he felt something shift inside him. A realization that surprised him. This was what care looked like. Not grand gestures. Not speeches. Not promises about the future. Just showing up, consistently, without conditions. He thought about all the people who had offered encouragement from a distance. All the ones who said they cared but stayed away. Then he looked around this small room. At this person who had little to give but gave anyway. The contrast was sharp. Later that night, he wrote in his notebook. Care doesn't announce itself. It doesn't explain. It opens the door. For the first time since the test began, he slept deeply. Not because his problems were solved. Not because his future was clear. But because he was no longer facing it alone. This unexpected person had done something no one else had. They had treated him like a human being, not a situation. And in that simple act, they had changed everything. The test had started as a way to see who would stay when the money was gone. He was beginning to understand that the most important answer wasn't about who left. It was about who remained. Living there did not feel like being rescued. That was the first thing he noticed. There was no sense of debt hanging in the air, no unspoken pressure to prove his worth. He was simply there, and that was enough. Meals happened naturally. A plate was set without asking. Portions were shared without comment. If he ate more, no one noticed. If he ate less, no one asked why. Food was treated as something normal, not a favor. He had forgotten how powerful that could feel. The couch became his place. A blanket folded neatly at one end. A pillow that always smelled faintly of clean laundry. No one reminded him it wasn't his bed. No one made jokes about how temporary things were. "You sleep okay?" was the only question he was asked. When he nodded, that was enough. There were no speeches about responsibility. No quiet warnings about timelines. No comments disguised as concern. He realized how tense he had been before, always bracing for the moment someone would ask what his plan was. Here, that moment never came. They treated him the same every day. Whether he was quiet or talkative. Whether he helped around the place or spent hours lost in thought. There was a steady consistency that slowly relaxed something deep inside him. One afternoon, while they ate together, he finally shared more of the story. Not all of it. Just enough to explain how things had fallen apart. He spoke without drama, his voice even, like he was describing someone else's life. They listened without interrupting. When he finished, he waited for the shift he had come to expect. The advice. The judgment. The subtle change in posture. It didn't come. "That sounds heavy," they said. "I'm glad you're not dealing with it alone." That was all. They did not treat him differently afterward. The next day looked exactly the same as the one before. Coffee in the morning. Shared space. Easy silence. It stunned him. He had spent years believing that being understood required explaining everything. That acceptance came after justification. This person had offered dignity without knowing the full truth, and kept offering it even after hearing some of it. Small moments began to stack up. A clean towel left out without asking. An extra portion saved when he came home late. A simple knock before entering the room, even though it was their home. Each gesture was quiet, ordinary, and together they felt enormous. He noticed how differently his body responded here. His shoulders dropped. His breathing slowed. He laughed more easily, even at small things. The constant knot in his chest loosened. One evening, they watched television together. Nothing special. Just something playing in the background. At one point, he realized he had stopped thinking about money entirely. That surprised him. For so long, success had been his measure of safety, his proof of value. Without it, he had expected to feel empty. Instead, he felt grounded. Later that night, lying on the couch, he thought about all the milestones he once chased. The numbers in accounts. The deals closed. The praise earned. None of it compared to this feeling. Not the feeling of being admired. The feeling of being accepted. He began to understand that dignity was not something you demanded or earned. It was something given freely, or not at all. Days passed, and nothing changed. And that was the point. They did not suddenly grow curious about his past. They did not hint at expectations. They did not treat his presence as temporary, even if it was. One morning, as they drank coffee together, he said quietly, "Thank you." They looked at him, confused. For what? For not making this harder than it already is. They shrugged slightly. People need space sometimes, they said. That's all. The simplicity of it stayed with him. He realized then how rare it was to be helped without being studied, to be supported without being corrected. This quiet kindness worked its way into him slowly, reshaping things he had accepted as normal. It showed him how much of his life had been spent earning permission to belong. Here, he belonged without effort. That understanding reached deeper than any success he had ever achieved. Deeper than pride. Deeper than fear. It reminded him of something essential he had lost along the way. Being human was enough. That night, he wrote again in his notebook. Kindness doesn't ask for proof. It doesn't keep score. It doesn't change when the story does. He closed the notebook and set it aside. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about what he had lost. He was thinking about what he had found. And he knew without doubt that this simple kindness had already changed him more deeply than any amount of money ever had. He had not planned the moment. That was important to him. This was not a reveal meant to impress or explain himself. It was simply the truth asking to be spoken. The days had continued quietly, comfortably, almost normally. And that was what made the weight of it grow heavier. The longer he stayed, the more he felt the need to be honest. Not because he owed anything, but because trust deserved truth. One evening after dinner, they sat across from each other with nothing but the sound of the room around them. No television. No distractions. Just quiet. He took a breath. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. They looked up, attentive but calm. No tension. No suspicion. "Okay," they replied. He started slowly. About the house. About selling it. About the money. How it hadn't disappeared the way he let people believe. How the collapse wasn't real, but the loneliness was. He didn't rush. He didn't defend himself. He just spoke. As the truth unfolded, he watched their face carefully. He braced for the moment he had come to expect. The change. It didn't come. There was surprise, yes. Eyebrows lifted slightly. A quiet pause. But no anger. No accusation. No sense of betrayal. When he finished, he looked down, unsure what to say next. "I understand if this changes things," he said softly. "I didn't mean to mislead you. I just needed to know what was real." They sat with the words for a moment. Then they spoke. I helped you because it was the right thing to do, they said. Not because of who you are or what you have. That was it. No lecture. No disappointment. No claim of being used. He felt something settle inside him. Something final. I didn't do it for a reward, they continued. And knowing this doesn't change why I helped. He nodded, unable to speak for a moment. That simple response confirmed everything. All the questions he had carried. All the doubt. All the quiet testing. This person had acted without calculation. Without expectation. Without conditions. The truth had not altered their kindness. He realized then how rare that was. They talked a little longer. About boundaries. About honesty. About how people made choices for different reasons. The conversation was steady and open, not heavy. Later that night, he sat alone and thought about how many relationships he had seen change when money entered the room. How quickly generosity turned transactional. How often help came with strings he hadn't noticed until they tightened. Here, there were no strings. The truth had not scared this person away. It had simply clarified the moment. He understood now that real character didn't react loudly to truth. It absorbed it. Before going to sleep, he wrote one final line in his notebook. Integrity stays the same, even when the story changes. The test was over. Not because everyone had been measured, but because the answer he needed had finally been given. He knew with absolute clarity what real care looked like, and he would never confuse it with anything else again. He did not feel the need to explain himself to everyone. That surprised him. For a long time, he thought clarity meant confrontation. That truth had to be announced loudly to matter. Now he knew better. There was no anger left in him. No urge to expose anyone or replay old conversations. What he felt instead was calm. A steady understanding of where things stood and where he wanted to stand next. When family reached out again, he responded kindly but briefly. He did not reopen old doors or revisit old roles. He no longer rushed to solve problems that were not his to carry. If someone complained, he listened without fixing. If someone hinted, he did not offer. Not out of bitterness, but clarity. He adjusted his boundaries quietly, the same way he had sold the house. Without drama. Without explanation. He learned that boundaries did not require permission. They only required consistency. Some people noticed the change. You've been distant, one message said. He read it, considered replying, then simply wrote back. I've been focused. That was true. He focused on presence instead of performance. On showing up where he was wanted, not where he was expected to provide. The person who had opened their door became part of his daily life. Not as a debt, not as a reward, but as a choice. They talked more now. Shared meals more intentionally. Laughed easily. He gave time freely. Attention fully. No money exchanged hands. And somehow that made it mean more. He noticed how different relationships felt when money was no longer the bridge. Conversations grew lighter. Moments felt real. There was nothing to prove. He still had his resources. He still had his success. But they no longer led the way. When he did help someone now, it was quiet and rare. Chosen carefully. Never announced. Never expected to return. Most requests faded once they realized he was no longer the automatic answer. And that was okay. He stopped measuring connection by frequency or obligation. He measured it by ease. By honesty. By whether silence felt comfortable instead of awkward. Some relationships naturally drifted away. Others stayed exactly where they were. A very small few grew stronger. He accepted all of it. One afternoon, sitting in a park, he watched people pass by. Some hurried. Some laughed. Some sat alone. He felt no rush to join or impress. For the first time, he felt rich in a way numbers had never given him. Not because he had more, but because he needed less. He thought back to the moment he signed the papers, the quiet room, the ordinary day. How he had wondered if anyone would care if the money was gone. Now he had his answer. Care was not loud. It did not arrive with advice or explanations. It showed up with space, dignity, and presence. He wrote one last time in his notebook. True wealth isn't revealed when you have everything. It's revealed when you appear to have nothing. He closed the notebook and placed it beside him. The test had changed him. Not by taking things away, but by showing him what could not be taken. And with that understanding he stood up, ready to move forward, not richer in money, but clearer in heart, stronger in boundaries, and finally at peace.